Superhero fatigue. That's a phrase that's been inescapable in recent years. People are over superhero movies. There's too many of them. It feels like homework. But rewatching an IHE video from 2016 had me seriously questioning this narrative. In it, he ran a Twitter poll where a majority of his 16,000 respondents said they were sick of superhero movies. Yeah, 10 whole years ago. Nowadays, a lot of us look back on the 2010s as the peak of superhero cinema. Was superhero fatigue real back then? Is it real now? Is it real at all? Those are all questions I sought out to answer mathematically. By analyzing and comparing review scores, budgets, and box office returns over every superhero movie widely released in theaters since 2010, I believe I've found the answer. But before I share the data, we need to define a few things. First, what even counts as a superhero movie? Just a movie with superheroes in it would exclude Black Widow and The Punisher, which are universally considered superhero stories. So a movie based on a comic? That definition is too broad because then it includes movies like The Men in Black, which don't fit the mold. The definition I've settled on are comic book adaptations in worlds where people have exceptional abilities, not necessarily superpowers, or original movies that directly pay homage to superhero stories like The Incredibles, Kick-Ass, and Hank. Wait, we really had to censor that one? Alright. Anyway, that should cover all our bases, and honestly, the trends and outcome of the data really doesn't change based on if I include debatable edge cases or not. Alright, next, what defines if a movie is successful or not? The consensus among box office analysts is that, as a general rule of thumb, a movie needs to make at least 2.5 times its production budget to be considered successful. That's because the production budget doesn't include the marketing budget, which is often another massive expense the studios need to make back. And they don't receive every dollar of the box office gross. Theaters get a cut, and that rate is different depending on the country. So between those two factors, it averages out to around 2.5 times the budget. A flop would be anything that makes less than that. There are a few cases where we don't know the exact budget or gross, and I'll cover them when we get to them. I've also compiled the review scores from both audiences and critics for this. For critic scores, I used Rotten Tomatoes. It was either that or Metacritic, and Rotten Tomatoes not only aggregates more reviews, but it includes ones that lack a numerical score. The number represents the percentage of critics who recommend the movie. If the movie has a 67 or higher, so 2/3 of critics liked it, I'll consider the consensus positive. For audience reviews, Rotten Tomatoes is actually not the best source. In 2019, the website changed its verification process as an anti-review bombing policy, so as a result, to leave a review for a movie in theaters, you specifically had to buy your tickets in advance from Fandango with an account that was registered to the same email as your Rotten Tomatoes account. It's just such a burdensome extra step that typically only mega fans will actually go through with it, skewing the scores higher. Like, you cannot tell me that 71% of audiences actually liked Morbius, one of the movies of all time. I found the IMDb scores to be the most accurate to what the general consensus I see online is, and it has one of the biggest sample sizes too. For the line between positive and negative, I also placed it at 6.7 out of 10. This was because The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and The Flash, two movies generally considered to be not very good, had a 6.6, whereas Blade 2 and Black Panther Wakanda Forever had a 6.7, and those movies were liked by a lot of people. With all that out of the way, let's get into the data. When a movie that was well received profits at the box office, or a movie that critics and audiences hated flops, neither of those things are surprising. People like seeing good movies and don't like to go to bad ones. What we're looking for are positively reviewed movies that flopped. If superhero fatigue is indeed real, it would mean that audiences aren't going to see the good superhero movies because they're so burned out on the whole concept. So, from 2000 to 2004, there were 12 total superhero movies, and we only had one positively reviewed flop, Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy from 2004. From 2005 to 2009, there were a total of 19 superhero movies, and yet again, the only one that both critics and audiences enjoyed that flopped was Hellboy 2: The Golden Army from 2008. This period also had two flops that audiences liked, but critics weren't so hot on, Watchmen and possibly Constantine. It's one of those movies where the exact budget wasn't published, and we only have a range, 70 to 100 million. It made 231 million at the box office, so if the budget was on the lower end of that spectrum, then it profited. From 2010 to 2014, we had 26 superhero movies. Once again, there was only one that was positively received by critics and audiences but flopped, Dredd from 2012. We had one definite flop that critics hated but audiences liked, James Gunn's Super from 2010. And we had two movies that are questionable depending on the exact budget, Captain America: The First Avenger and X-Men: First Class. Given the fact that both of these had higher review scores across the board, spawned sequels, and made millions from DVD sales, I think it's safe to assume they profited. Next, from 2015 to 2019, there wasn't a single superhero movie that was positively reviewed but flopped of the 33 that came out. Before we get into the COVID era, let's pause here and reflect on the unexpected flops. Hellboy, Hellboy 2, Constantine, Watchmen, Dread, and Super. Notice anything in common about these movies? At the time, none of them were incorporated in the Marvel or DC universes. Hellboy was a Dark Horse Comics property, Judge Dredd is from 2000 AD Comics, Super was an original indie film, Constantine wasn't DC until 2011, and while the Watchmen were published by DC, it was its own single standalone story for years. No matter how good these movies were, they just didn't have the same name recognition to make hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office. Alright, the next 5-year period is 2020 to 2024. This is where things get messy. In case you forgot, we had this thing called the COVID-19 pandemic, which shut down movie theaters for months. And even when they reopened in the US, other countries had them closed longer. Some only opened with partial capacity rules, and a lot of people still avoided going to theaters for their own health. Spider-Man No Way Home made almost $2 billion, so by that time in late 2021, we can assume that regular movie-going habits mostly returned. Before that, for any movie with a positive reception that flopped, we can safely lay the blame on people being literally unable to see the movie or not willing to risk death for it rather than superhero fatigue for why they didn't go. With that aside, once again, there was only one flop unaffected by COVID that both critics and audiences enjoyed. Can you guess what it is? DC League of Super Pets. This one's understandable. It's an animated movie made specifically for kids, not quite the same general superhero movie-going audience. There was one movie that had a good critic score and a mediocre audience score that flopped. Blue Beetle. Personally, I like that movie a lot, but it has a 6.1 on IMDb. It's worth noting that Blue Beetle came out after DC announced they were resetting the whole universe, so it didn't matter in the grand scheme of things, and it was during the Hollywood strike, so the actors weren't going out and promoting their movie. And finally, 2025. As of the making of this video, the jury is still out on Fantastic Four, but projections indicate it will cross the $500 million profitability mark at the box office. That leaves just one unexpected flop: Thunderbolts Asterisk. That makes Thunderbolts Asterisk the one and only superhero movie from a major Marvel or DC film franchise in the past 25 years to be positively received by both critics and audiences, yet flop at the box office. So, is superhero fatigue real?
No.
Every single other flop was either disliked by audiences, a kids movie, an indie movie, or starred lesser known characters. And most of them happened in the 2000s, long before IHE's 2016 poll or all the recent articles about superhero fatigue. Almost all of the films flopping are just bad. Of the 126 superhero movies since 2000, only 43 are definite flops. Of those 43, only 5 had positive review scores from both critics and audiences, and 3 had only one group review it positively. So that brings up another question. Are superhero movies just worse now? According to the math, yeah. Since 2020, we've had 22 movies that audiences disliked and 19 that critics panned. 2015 to 2019 had only 8 bad movies according to audiences and 10 according to critics. 2010 to 2014 had 7 bad according to audiences and 9 according to critics. 2005 to 2009 was another rough era with 13 bad movies according to both groups. And 2000 to 2004 had 5 bad movies according to audiences and 6 according to the critics. So next time you hear someone use the phrase superhero fatigue, send them this video and tell them it's actually just bad movie fatigue. Thanks for watching.
Hello there.